following contains situations and circumstances that are relatable to all women, but are still uncomfortable and sometimes quite awful. We don't pull any punches. Listener discretion is advised.
Life's a foolish game. Do you ever feel the same? Well, maybe we could change, turn the ship another way. Feel it in the darkness. We're sailing right into those jagged cliffs. Yeah. Some say we've always been insane. Hey, life's a foolish game. Life's a foolish game.
Ambition has a different feeling when you're a woman. There's a level of pressure with it that no man will ever know. For us, it's not about finding a dream and chasing it. It's finding your dream and finding a way to justify it in a sea of relationships, motherhood, and a lot of societal bias. Welcome to Frenemies, a Toil and Trouble Media original. On this show, we examine notable women and the rivalries that help define them. Today, we return to our tale of Kamala Harris and Jill Biden, with Kamala overhauling the justice system and Jill juggling multiple roles. In spite of a dizzying schedule of teaching, family, and accompanying Joe on the campaign trail, Jill returned to grad school once again, earning her doctorate in education from the University of Delaware in 2007. She didn't stray from her path. Her dissertation, titled Student Retention at the Community College Level, Meeting Students' Needs, showed not only her anticipated subject matter expertise, but her passion as well. In reference to her accomplishment, she took on new professional assignments and a new title, Doctor. Now, unless you've been living under a red baseball cap long enough to atrophy your brain, Doctor is a title that nearly everyone who earns the advanced degree uses. It's far better than the Master's honorific, which ironically is Master. And after driving your loved ones nuts while driving yourself further into student loan debt for a certificate few will ever be able to make a significant profit from, who wouldn't call themselves doctor? I mean, if you think about it, it's literally the main draw. In January 2009, Jill accepted a position at the Alexandria campus of Northern Virginia Community College, becoming the first second lady in history to hold a paying job while her husband was in office. Now under Secret Service protection, she tried to make her classroom experience as normal as she could, holding regular office hours and sharing cubicle space with another teacher. She also pressured the armed agents assigned to accompany her to dress as unassumingly as possible. Keeping a student's attention was difficult enough. She didn't need any more distractions. As a result, her students often didn't know anything about her public life, simply calling her Dr. B. If they happened to connect the name and ask, she would simply reply that she was a relative. Which wasn't a lie, right? In the classroom, Jill was a compassionate teacher who took real interest in her students' lives and assigned a lot of homework. And her students and peers found her a useful ally. She used the perks of her White House connections to obtain tickets for events like garden visits and holiday tours with her colleagues and their classes. But she maintained her position in the hierarchy as well, putting in requests for time off like any other employee when she had to be away for administrative events. Their home at No. 1 Observatory Circle, the Vice President's mansion, was a refuge away from duty and service where she and the family could relax and spend quality time together. By now, the kids were grown and had kids of their own. Beau had already proven to be an adept politician himself, being elected Attorney General of Delaware just a few years earlier, and continued to serve as a major within the state's National Guard. Inspired by his deployment to Iraq, Jill wrote the children's book, Don't Forget, God Bless Our Troops. For Kamala, relaxation was rare. When she ran for Attorney General in 2010, many in law enforcement opposed it. While she made gains in San Francisco and within the DA's office, they were still sour over her decision to avoid the death penalty, even in cases of convicted cop killers. Things didn't look any better when she was campaigning. Authorities shut down a police department crime lab after a technician was accused of skimming drugs. The allegations raised questions about the lab's ability to appropriately handle evidence in criminal cases and integrity concerns for those convictions whose success had relied upon it. It led Kamala to immediately dismiss 20 otherwise solid drug cases. But her problems only grew when documents were uncovered showing her prosecutors were aware of the compromise months before and had hidden it from the defense. While she responded by forming a unit specifically charged with sharing evidence with defense attorneys, that clusterfuck caused the number of dropped cases within her office to rise to over 1,500, and her leadership to be categorized as either too soft on crime or corrupt. Not exactly winning her any points with the Back the Blue crowd. Those same groups did little celebrating when she was sworn in the following January, but no one could argue her first term wasn't productive. She obtained 2 of the largest recoveries of excess Medi-Cal and Medicare payments in the state's history and secured a financial settlement of $20.2 billion in debt reductions from some of the country's largest banks accused of illegally foreclosing on homeowners. And she networked, aligning herself with Beau Biden. She and Joe's son tried several cases where crimes extended into multiple state jurisdictions, and the two shared information and strategies, forming a fast friendship. Their shared devotion to family and protecting the vulnerable led them to work together on various fronts, including sex trafficking, gun violence, the online distribution of child pornography, and nursing home abuse. The following year, she directed the California Department of Justice to improve its DNA testing capabilities, clearing California's DNA backlog for the first time. But her record wasn't without controversy. After being elected, Kamala announced her office would not defend Prop 8, a state constitutional amendment recognizing marriage as being only between heterosexuals. And in February of 2013, she made good on her promise, filing a brief asserting Prop 8 was unconstitutional. She also declined to pursue complaints against One West Bank, which at the time was owned by an investment group headed by Steve Mnuchin, then a private citizen. When his name became more recognizable to the public, she was criticized for these actions, as well as accepting a donation from him. She announced her intention to run again the following year, just in time for more controversy when a federal judge ruled that the long delays between sentencing and execution in California amounted to cruel and unusual punishment. If her decision to appeal a ruling that went part and parcel with her campaign promises wasn't puzzling enough, the language used in the filing certainly made those familiar with her platform, for or against, scratch their heads. She asserted a ban on the death penalty was not supported by the law and undermined protections provided by the courts. And she blasted suggestions to improve the process, citing that the idea could be used to bypass many due process protections. She may not have liked the system, but she didn't want it jacked with. She later said that she was obligated to defend capital punishment as the legal representative of the state. But her explanation did little to satisfy critics who cited her choice not to defend Proposition 8 when it was challenged a year earlier. Strategic representation or cherry picking? I'll let you decide. The Supreme Court served her another helping of problems when that September it decided California's prisons were so overcrowded that they too inflicted cruel and unusual punishment. In response to the public outcry against her office, she unsuccessfully appealed the early release of prisoners, explaining, "I have a client, and I don't get to choose my client." The reason she gave in her briefing was even more cringy. She argued that the state couldn't possibly release them early. Not while there was such a need for inmate firefighting labor. But she ran for office again that fall and was reelected. So, I suppose somebody bought into it. 2015 was a busy year for her. She won settlements against communication giant Comcast for failing to protect the privacy of its consumers. Violations which cost the company $59 million, as well as a $1.2 billion judgment against the for-profit Corinthian College for targeting the public with deceptive marketing and false advertising. She also scored settlements against several major corporations for violating environmental regulations for millions more, which didn't make her any friends among capitalists. But in terms of reducing oil spills and hazardous waste exposure, it's a step in the right direction. But the job wasn't without its messes. Once, lawyers for an inmate convicted of murder attempted to have the case thrown out when new evidence surfaced suggesting prosecutors lied on the stand during trial. Representing the state, Kamala's office opposed, only relenting when other corroborating evidence went viral. Critics also point to the AG's decision to defend a molestation conviction local prosecutors won using a false confession. Now, that doesn't mean she made the decision to defend this dog of a case herself, or even was aware of it. Any state's attorney general's office is staffed with several prosecutors who file motions all the time. But hers was the name on the door, and it didn't always cast her in the best light. Like when her office declined to handle the Seal Beach mass shooting in 2011, after the judge recused the entire Orange County DA's office for prosecutorial misconduct. Kamala's explanation? Quote, "It was being handled at the local level." In 2016, Carl Ferrer, the CEO of Backpage.com, was arrested on felony charges of pimping, conspiring to commit pimping, and pimping a minor. A whole lot of pimping. In her announcement, Kamala stated that 99% of the state's revenue came from ads related to prostitution, many of which involved victims of sex trafficking, including children. He was convicted in 2018 after negotiating a plea deal to federal charges, in addition to charges brought by California, Arizona, and Texas. And unless his sentence included being whacked with a ball bat by each and every one of his victims in the body part of their choosing, he got off easy. Joe's second term as Obama's VP went pretty much like the first one for Jill. She continued to teach, playing a minor role within the administration, until the unthinkable happened. In August of 2013, Bo experienced what observers described as an episode of disorientation and weakness and was admitted to the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. The diagnosis was the worst thing she could possibly imagine. Bo had brain cancer, a glioblastoma multiforme. In terms of even aggressive cancers, glioblastoma is particularly nasty. More closely resembling crabgrass than a typical tumor, its spindly nature makes the damage all the more devastating, and its survival rate is typically measured in months. My best friend died of this disease in 2021, and I still struggle to find the words to properly describe the torment she experienced. There's nothing quite like it. After fighting the disease for over a year, Bo finally succumbed in 2015. Jill was shattered. Quote, "My life changed in an instant. All during his illness, I truly believed he was going to live, up until the moment that he closed his eyes, and I just never gave up hope." The grief and pain caused her to lose her faith, and she stopped praying and attending church. What was the point? It took her years to resolve it and come back around. But for a long time, any time a supporter offered her prayers, she just smiled and said thank you. And Joe was heartbroken. She watched helplessly as he wept. This was never supposed to happen. Bo was supposed to survive him. He was supposed to follow in his footsteps. Only months earlier, his name was being tossed around as a potential nominee for the Delaware governor's seat. Now, he was just gone. The funeral was attended by an impressive representation of all of Bo's accomplishments: friends, family, soldiers, and politicians, each with a unique story of how he impacted their lives. Of his loss, Kamala said he was an incredible friend and colleague, and later wrote, "There were periods when I was taking heat that Bo and I talked every day, sometimes multiple times a day. We had each other's backs." Jill stood by Joe at the White House Rose Garden when he announced he wouldn't run for president a couple months later. He just didn't have it in him. While she understood and supported his decision, Jill admitted she was disappointed. In her heart, she knew he would be the best. In 2016, Barbara Boxer stepped down as the senior senator. And with the endorsements of Jerry Brown, Obama, and Joe, Kamala easily defeated the Republican candidate, becoming the second African American woman and the first South Asian American to serve. Which is impressive, but still a crappy statistic if you think about it. She was also the first African American woman and the first South Asian American senator to openly attack just about all of Donald Trump's inaugural actions, like opposing the appointment of Betsy DeVos and Jeff Sessions, his executive order barring citizens of Muslim-majority countries from entering the U.S. for 90 days, and the confirmation of Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court. Her questioning of Rod Rosenstein during a Senate hearing about the firing of then FBI Director James Comey was described by many of her male peers as prosecutorial. Senators John McCain and Richard Burr, apparently unfamiliar with the concept of an assertive female, said they were uncomfortable with her line of questions, interrupting her several times with requests to be more respectful. When she questioned Jeff Sessions a week later, he admitted she made him nervous. But she didn't give those on the Democratic side any breaks either. When images surfaced of Minnesota Senator Al Franken pretending to grope a female radio host while she was sleeping, Kamala was one of the first to call for his resignation, stating, quote, "Sexual harassment and misconduct should not be allowed by anyone and should not occur anywhere." And when he did, she took his spot on the Senate Judiciary Committee. While in office, Kamala advocated for gun control laws, the DREAM Act, paths to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, legalization of cannabis, healthcare, and tax reform. But she never forgot the way she was bussed around as a child either. and pushed for school districts to do more to promote integration, saying, quote, "The schools of America are as segregated, if not more segregated today than when I was in elementary school." When the presidential election season rolled around, Kamala was eager to see Trump kick rocks and declared her candidacy. But before she could get on the ticket, she had to win the Democratic nomination and square off against Joe. 4 years away from office gave him a chance to heal and watch many of his accomplishments be reversed. Jill continued to teach as the two watched current events unfold, skillfully commenting as only a wife can, in such a way that he heard what she said without always realizing it. By March of 2019, she'd worked him over enough that she could tell him to run quite easily. And on October 25th, he announced it. That brought him immediately back into the public eye, and with it came renewed speculation. Things had changed since he'd stepped away from public office. In the time that had gone by, several women had come forward accusing him of inappropriate contact. Wanting to shield her husband from attack, and unwilling to see his campaign derailed so early in the process, Jill took the lead and was the first to respond to the allegations, saying, quote, "I think what you don't realize is how many people approached Joe. Men and women, looking for comfort or empathy. But going forward, I think he's going to have to judge. Be a better judge of when people approach him, how he's going to react, that he maybe shouldn't approach them." As if she knew her words wouldn't satisfy anyone, she added that she could relate and had experienced manhandling herself. Quote, "I just sort of stepped aside. I didn't address it. Things have changed. There was a time when women were afraid to speak out. I can remember specifically it was in a job interview. If that same thing happened today, I'd turn around and say, 'What do you think you're doing?' It's totally different." But she really didn't score any points when addressing her husband's role in the 1991 hearing for the nomination of Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court, and Anita Hill's testimony when she said, quote, "It's time to move on." Wow. She also received less than stellar grades from critics when on the campaign trail in New Hampshire, she said, "You know, your candidate might be better on, I don't know, healthcare than Joe is, but you've got to look at who's going to win this election. And maybe you have to swallow a little bit and say, okay, personally like so-and-so better, but your bottom line has to be that we have to beat Trump." She is a doctor of English. I can't help but think she could have come up with a better argument. I think this one is a C- at best. But when her stepson Hunter came under fire during the Trump-Ukraine scandal, she put in for the extra credit. Quote, "Hunter did nothing wrong, and that's the bottom line." Joe's campaign faced other challenges too. Early on, video clips and related stories about Joe's work with liberal nemesis Storm Thurmond on tough-on-crime measures in the 1970s saw renewed scrutiny, followed by letters Joe wrote as a junior senator to James O. Eastland, then a powerful senator from Mississippi and a devout segregationalist. Then the Washington Post received a file of Biden's record on busing, because Kamala's campaign leaked them, at least the last two. It's still unclear which candidate's team was responsible for the first, but we are talking politics, not knitting. The first Democratic presidential debate was a big deal, and one Kamala took seriously. She spent the week before at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach, one of Hillary Clinton's favorites. Staying with her nearly night and day were her trusted advisors and consultants, whom she charged with the task of throwing her every curveball they could to prepare her for what would likely be trial of her career. And their acting skills, too. Her press secretary, Ian Sams, tried to put on the best Biden impression he could, while the advisor playing Bernie Sanders turned up his angry old guy full blast and used actual quotes. In such a large esteemed panel, Kamala's team believed she needed to control at least one topic of discussion. Race seemed to be the gimme. When the topic came up, as it surely would, she would take control of the discussion as the only candidate of color and dominate. If she did it right, it would earn her plenty of attention, media sound bites, and a hefty increase in contributions. It was being moderated by MSNBC. Who was going to stop her? And if it happened to be against someone she looked up to, someone like Joe, she could always set the attack gently, like beginning it with a phrase like, "I do not believe you're a racist, but..." Still, Kamala hesitated and asked if they were sure this was the right thing to do. Wouldn't the disclaimer just seem hollow? Like saying, "No offense, but," right before you say the most offensive thing you can think of? One of her consultants agreed with her. But the rest of the team didn't. The debate was about showing differences, not making friends. She wasn't running for her friend's dad's approval. She was running for president. And the disclaimer would help her do that, giving her just enough wiggle room to get the rest of her message across. They also argued it would allow her to assume control of at least one significant part of the debate. It would give her a chance to stand out in front of the media and voters, and it would let her get ahead of, presumably Biden's, inevitable question, "Are you calling me a racist?" So she practiced it, lobbing the phrase at various pseudo-candidates in several assorted scenarios until she felt comfortable. Or until she could at least come across appearing comfortable. She soon overcame any remaining guilt when at a fundraising event in Manhattan, Joe spoke nostalgically about his early days in the Senate and the work he was able to do with segregationalists. Quote, "At least there was some civility. We got things done. We didn't agree on much of anything. We got things done." If that wasn't enough, he defended his work with Eastland and tipped his hat to him, saying, "He never called me boy. He always called me son." When she learned of his remarks, Kamala didn't know whether she should flip out or be grateful for his confession. Aides said the mental struggle resulted in almost a wince. She pulled the trigger the next time she addressed the press. Quote, "If the people he was talking about with such affection had their way, I would never have been able to be a United States Senator." And on stage at the debate, she didn't flinch. Quote, "I am going to now direct this at Vice President Biden. I do not believe you're a racist, and I agree with you when you commit yourself to the importance of finding common ground. But I also believe, and it's personal, it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you worked with them to oppose busing. And you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools, and she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me." Joe was stunned and stammered to make his recovery. She was mischaracterizing his position, he said. That's not what he stood for, and she knew that. Looking into his eyes as he concluded his response, she also saw something else. She heard him. When the moderators called for a brief commercial break, Joe leaned over to his right and muttered something to Pete Buttigieg. According to observers, he said, quote, "Well, that was some fucking bullshit." We'll pick up the story next week. This has been Frenemies. Thanks for listening. Frenemies is a production of Toil and Trouble Media. Executive produced by Jennifer Beck. This episode was also written and performed by Jennifer Beck. I'm kind of a big deal. Additional production assistance was provided by Erin Iris, and our music was performed by Snowflake and Admiral Bob. Thanks, guys. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen and tell your friends. It's a cheap way to support us, and it really helps the show get noticed. Tell your frenemies, too. We're good with that. And be sure to subscribe wherever you listen and follow us on social media so you'll never miss an episode. If you want even more Toil and Trouble media in your life, be sure to check out our Patreon page, where, for a couple bucks, you can get access to early and ad-free episodes of all our shows, and our website at toilandtroublemedia.com, where we have merch, blogs, and much more. And as always, thanks for listening.